rancher's life is not a wealthy life. The wealth is how you live and how you raise your family. They learn about birth, life, death, and you name it. And I just love doing what we do.
It is a way of life. There's always constant worries, whether it be fire, whether it be rain, drought, fences need to be fixed, or cattle need to be gotten off the road, and things every day that occur, and it's stressful at times, but wouldn't have it any other way.
We're the boss. Nobody can fire us.
My family came here in a wagon train in the spring of 1847 when they found the Donner Party. My great-grandfather and my great-grandmother, their name was Holt. They staked a claim here before California was a state. Lived over here about a mile and a half away and had my grandmother, Fanny. She married my grandpa, John Richards. Then they had my Aunt Dolly, my dad, Fred, my Uncle Roy, and my Uncle Doyle. They were born about a mile and a half away. Bob Barrett's grandmother was their midwife. Their birth certificates were just a piece of paper. It said John Richards, Franny Richards are the parents, midwife by Maud Jones, along with a birth date, and that's all it was on the paper. There's an old truck parked over there. It's a 37 model Chevy. They used it till it quit, and the family agreed it will stay there. And of course the hog floors and the homestead foundation's still there. And there's one field over here that we own is called the McGurk Field. And Jack McGurk built a round circular rock wall that he put a gate in, and it was close to the creek. And he could put his horse in there at night. And a lot of those rock walls, they'd fence off a couple of 100 acres. But they didn't do it, the Chinese built it for them. And that's what they used to fence the cattle in. Otherwise, it was just free open range. This is my friend Bob Barrett. He's an old-time cowboy from around here. He's done a lot of packing in the park. Bob's got a lot of history behind him, and he can tell you a lot of good stories.
Well, my grandfather was on my mother's side, was Wayne Westfall. And my grandmother was Maud. They were married. I couldn't tell you how long. I was pretty young, probably when they separated. And later on, she married a cattleman by the name of Tom Jones, whose residence was down in the White Rock country. Tom's parents come out here. They were building a courthouse, so that kind of dates the time they lived in that White Rock country. And Tom used to tell stories on how after the Civil War, it was times were hard. It was very difficult to make a living anywhere in the country. The mining was pretty much done in the county, and at least the gold mining, and some timbering and higher up and so forth, but everybody scratched pretty hard just to make a living. They would harvest the oats with a hand scythe and sickle, then put them on a tarp and beat the stalks and save enough grain to plant the following year. I spent quite a few winters over there in White Rock, and my grandmother kind of homeschooled me. I had bronchitis, and my home place was above Mariposa, up there in that Jersey-Dale country, and Dara district they called it, and they thought they'd get me out of that snow and put me down there in the fog. I'd get along better, I guess, but my wintertime I was basically raised down there, and it was all ranching country, and it hasn't changed yet, thankfully. The only thing that's changed is the people. The people die off, and there's not many old families left, like the Richards and some of them. So there was Ward Mountain, named after either Charlie or Jim Ward or their families, and they were black. And the Roffles here, they were black. And the reason I mentioned it, at that time, there was quite a bit of prejudice in everybody. Kind of raised around some of it myself. But nobody, they all had something good to say about those people. They talked about working for Charlie Ward, who was a cow buyer. Jim Ward was a hog farmer. I can remember Tom Jones telling me that hog's hard to rope. He runs with his head down close to the ground, and he hadn't got any horns, and he's awful. But he said old Jim Ward could rope one as good as anybody. Art kind of had a pretty good story about the black fellow that lived across the way here.
We called him Ike. He lived across the creek just past our house there. He had an old wood cabin, and my dad would always tell me that when he was going to school from their home place down here to Oakvale, that they'd ride their old white horse down the hill, all three of them, or four of them, and my aunt and the two uncles and my dad, and they'd be on the same horse. And they'd go by old Ike's cabin, and he was by the creek. He'd be eating his breakfast and his mush with an old wooden spoon and a wood dirt floor, and he'd be eating, and they'd say, "Come on in here, boys, it's raining." So they'd go in there for a minute, wait for the rain to kind of break. And Dad said many a time old Ike would just reach down that old wooden spoon, hit the pig on the nose with a wooden spoon, and go back to eating his mush. And okay. I was like 4 or 5 years old, had a little pony, and that's about the last time that Tom Jones and my grandparents and my dad and them, and DeMosses and Prestons, and I'm trying to think of some other names, Gouchers, the Wards. They put all the cattle and the hogs and the sheep together, and they drove them down Mariposa Creek to La Grande. And I remember doing that, and then we'd get so far down Mariposa Creek, and we'd stay overnight because the hogs and sheep wouldn't travel very fast. And then about 3 days later, we were in La Grande, and they would sort them out, and the Swift Company would buy them and put them on the train, and they'd go to San Francisco.
I used to be a horseshoer, but probably before that, got out of high school, needed a job. We went to the mountains. So I went into Yosemite, and I worked at the government stable as a packer. And I probably, when it was all said and done, I had about 24 seasons with them. I remember old man McGregor, the first thing he told me the first day of work, he said, "You take care of that mule." He says, "When he's gone, you're gone. You won't have a job." So I took that at heart. So he didn't have to be out there with you to tell when you got in that what kind of care that animal had. He knew right away, and he wanted to see a full belly on him for one thing. When we were packing, our barn was clear across the valley, so a lot of times we would lead across the valley floor, then we'd get to the trailhead, we'd turn all the mules loose that were packed and start them out ahead of us, and they'd go up the trail ahead of us. And every once in a while, there's only 2 places to pass on that Nevada Falls trail, and you'd get the first one, them old mules would pull over, and you could check your loads and then send them on their way again. I was back there in Moraine Meadows. We was cutting logs off the trail, and, you know, we'd probably been out 10 days or so, and I was with an old Indian, Alvis Brown, and Alvis was the best packer that I was ever around. The coyotes howled one night there. He looked across the fire at me, and he said, "Somebody close to me died." And when we got out of the mountains, it was a aunt of his been killed in a car wreck. Now, how he knew that, I have no idea. But Alvis, he could pack. And I kind of wanted to maybe go to work for myself. So wife and I, we left in '65. We moved to Hornitas, and she's been there all her life. But until I got my business going, I had to have a way to feed my wife, so I worked for the county road department for about a year. And then I got up where then all I had to do was shoe horses. And I did that for several years and had an opportunity to go to Merced College, and I was there 28 years, and I taught horseshoeing. And I used to have a colt starting class, and then I had the rodeo team. And our women's team, we won the West Coast region for 3 years in a row. The secret of being a good coach is to have talent. If you don't have the talent, you're not going to do anything. And I was lucky enough I had some girls that had talent.
Well, we took a little ride out in the back, and there's some petroglyphs out there. Bob kind of understands it better than I do. And
see, what we're looking at here is petroglyphs, which resemble a lot like the ones that we see on the east side would have been a Paiute. But they're normally found at hunting sites, where as we look on this side of the mountains, most of these are near a village, which is pretty unusual. But as I look at them more and think about it, I'm almost sure that they were Chowchillans. Chowchillans were in the valley, the foothills. They were the most warlike. Some of Fremont's writings tell that Agua Fria, when it was the county seat, they were having trouble with the Indians, which were Chowchillans, and they were camped at Mount Bullion and Bear Valley. And they always told a story about old Jack McGurk. When he'd go to town, he'd go with the Quicks, and they'd go in a wagon, and he'd sit between Mr. and Mrs. Quick, so some jealous husband wouldn't take a shot at him.
The Richards family has been in the ranching business for over 100 years in Mariposa. We don't use hormones in our cattle, and the U.S. government controls the use of vaccines, and some of which are required by law. We do not use antibiotics unless it's absolutely necessary, and if we do administer any antibiotics, they are recorded on the animal's medical records and the ear tag number. We are active in keeping the fields free of contaminants that the cattle may consume.
My name is Jerry J., and I'm a 1980 graduate of Mariposa County High School. Here, my family's, one side's been here since the late 1800s, and the other came out with the railroads in the early 1900s. I worked for Cal Fire as a seasonal right out of high school. I left early and went and did that, and then I went to Columbia College because we were only seasonals back then, and I went through the fire program there so I could, you know, try to get myself in there permanent. But my buddy, he was a cowboy, and I used to hang out with a lot of those guys, you know, that we went to school with, a lot of them. And he worked for a lot of different people over on the Madera side. So I'd go over and help him work for Henry Bona. But we'd work for him, cattle drive his cows up into the high country, bring them back, we'd take them in and brand them. I really liked the lifestyle and doing all this stuff, so I got a horse from some friends, and so pretty soon I got me a trailer, and I was hauling my horse around and helping them, and I enjoy it. The kids love it. Even my granddaughter loves to come ride the horse. So.
I grew up in Cottonwood, which is up north of Red Bluff, and in the late 1950s, we moved on to a cattle ranch up there, Bud Moore's old Hereford Ranch. My dad was foreman for over 20 years. We lived on 20 acres, and we all had horses and helped with the ranch work. And yeah, we got a small ranch. We got about 20 acres. We just enjoy the lifestyle. The kids grew up that way, and my son's got a place over there, and they got horses, and his kids, and they got 40 acres. And so it's a great lifestyle. I met Art here through a guy by the name of Tom Martin, and I got to helping them. And then Tom would come over here and help Art, and that's how I got to know him, and I got to help him. And I met Jerry through here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, through Art. That's how I met Jerry. Been good ever since. Love coming out here.
I love to be out riding horses out in this, you know, you can hear the bugs more than you can hear the people.
well, I can remember the day when Bob was in your 20s or middle 20s, and he rode the bulls at the Mariposa Fair. And you go to the fair office, pay your entry fees. I remember watching him ride bulls out of the bucking chute.
That was probably the funny part he was talking about. So they had, it was quite a deal. It was cow horse races. And somebody would always bring a ringer in, you know, and beat everybody. But the best part, they'd have maybe, it was during the rodeo time, maybe they'd have 4 during the, and that's a quarter-mile track, but the way that track's kind of set up was hard to get a horse that could really run on it good. But the best part of it was they'd have a race, and then they'd have a fight.
Yeah.
You know, and then they'd have another race, and they'd have another fight. And so the fights were really better watching than the race.
But there's one event that I always used to get a kick out of. They had a foot race between a horse and a cowboy afoot. Bob Barrett was in tennis shoes. He had to run 50 yards. My Uncle Doyle was on a horse. He had to run 100 yards on his roping horse. At the end of the race, it was a tie.
Man, that's great.
And you talk about the crowd go, this is what you say, crowd go crazy?
Yeah.
They went crazy.
I told Doyle to hold his horse up a little bit, give him a chance, yeah.
Earlier we were talking about living on the ranch and dealing with critters. I had an incident where I had a bat in the house. And the bat was flying around and scared me to death, so I ran in the bedroom, I closed the door, and I told Art, you know, I'm not coming out until you get that bat out of the house. Well, Art just proceeded to sit in a chair, and that evening the baseball game was on, and of course Barry Bonds was going to do his record-breaking home run, so Art was really intent on watching that game, so he's relaxed in his easy chair, and of course I'm in my bedroom watching my own program, and next thing I hear is a boom, bang, oh shit, son of a bitch, boom, bang, bang. Barry Bonds, that's a home run for you. And, you know, and I opened the door and I said, what happened? He said, that damn bat came flying across my head and scared the crap out of me. He got rid of the bat.
We're going to gather some cows and calves, bring them in, check them over. Make sure everything is okay, because in 2 weeks we'll take the calves off the cows, wean the calves. The cows will be dry all summer, and the calves will be held over and sold this time next year.
This is the struggle right here. Ah! Now I'm up, I'm good.
The last breathing longhorn lay dying by the river. For lack of vegetation, the cold wind made him shiver. A cowboy sat beside him with sadness in his face, to see the fatal passing of this last and noble race. The longhorn quivered and he raised his shaking head. Say, I do not care to linger when all my friends are dead. These Jerseys and these Holsteins, they are no friend of mine. They belong to the nobleman that lives across the brine. Tell the coyotes when they come at night a-looking for their prey, they might as well go further, for they find it will not pay. And if they tend to eat me, they fairly soon shall see that my bones and hide are petrified. They'll find no beef on me. The cowboy rose up sadly, and he mounted his cayuse. Said the days are gone when cowboys and longhorns are no use. He rode off gazing backwards upon the dead bovine. When he stepped in a bog hole, fell down and broke his spine. Now you'll miss him as a roundup. He's gone, his merry shell, and the campfire's gone out.